I'm Mark Greenblatt, and pleased to be joined now by Philip Mudd, the former CIA Deputy Director of the Counterterrorism Center there, along with the former Deputy Director of the FBI's National Security Branch.
Yes.
And you're out now, Philip, with a new book. It's called Black Site, and it goes deep into really a narrative history of how the United States got into creating these secret detention centers and interrogation centers, post 9/11.
Intelligence is not just secrets, it's information, it's knowledge. The knowledge that the CIA had about al-Qaeda going into the spring of 2002 when the first captive was picked up, Abu Zubaydah, was more limited, I think, than most Americans know. I was there. We didn't know that much, and my colleagues on the operational side, the guys who run spies, would tell you that. For example, the informant base in al-Qaeda, the number of sources, human sources we had in the organization, not that good. So when you get the first detainee, as you say, very harsh techniques used. People sat back and said, if he doesn't want to speak, how can we increase our knowledge about al-Qaeda if he never says anything? And that was part of the genesis of the Black Site program.
And I think what strikes me about the style that you've chosen to write this book in reading it is you really say that you're attempting to almost transport people back in a time machine. You're not trying to change people's minds if they have very serious feelings about either supporting this sort of technique or really against it. What you're doing is you're taking people back in a time machine of sorts to say, look, on September 10th of 2001, the United States was essentially living in a period of bliss, and in 24 hours that changed.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, that phrase time machine, I hadn't heard that before, but that's what I wanted to do. Because I thought my friends would never speak and my colleagues would never speak, I wanted people, whether they want to critique the program or not, to be able to step back and say, at least I understand the world that the CIA lived in. I can almost step through the corridors and smell the sense of tension that drove them to some decisions that were really controversial.
Because you write now that history has dulled the sense of immediacy, the profound threat and the pervasive responsibility that CIA officers felt at the time.
Yeah, I think that people look back on some of what happened, and when I do public speeches, people can get pretty aggressive about this. Look back through a lens that's a 2019 lens, which makes sense. History always looks back from the lens of today. That's a problem. If you want to understand why people took decisions that were so controversial, you have to understand the anticipation at that time of a second wave. To step back into the corridors of CIA when people are saying, if we don't do something, and there's a second wave that results in another 3,000 or nearly 3,000 dead, would we say that we should have done more? Would we say that we should have interrogated harshly Abu Zubaydah? People have to understand the time to start to make decisions about why the CIA did what they did. The people who have the most knowledge that we needed were obviously the leadership, that top 1/2 of 1%. If you capture thousands of people in Afghanistan, the likelihood that one of them knows about an attack in the United States is limited. If you capture someone like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, captured in 2003, he was the architect of 9/11. That's the kind of guy you want to talk about. The final reason that so few people 100 plus went through the CIA facilities is, if you capture somebody like that, they're going to lie to you. You need to know enough about them. You don't know anything about a guy, a third-rate fighter who just has an AK-47. You know a lot about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And when he starts lying, you want to know enough to realize he's not telling us the truth. He's not compliant yet. You have to have enough information to determine when someone is moving toward compliance, when they're starting to tell more truths.
So, Philip, your book, Black Site, what it does so well is put people into the mindset of a CIA officer.
Yeah.
Both then and now, even looking back, you're talking to them now and looking back, and many people say, look, we know it's controversial, but this was needed and necessary. That's their take. What's your take looking back? Was this program initiated the best way that it possibly could? And look, what are the lessons learned for history?
It wasn't initiated the best way that it could be initiated. And I think the officers I spoke with would say that there wasn't the luxury of time, and the CIA didn't have the experience to do this. That said, at the time in 2002, to me, it's understandable why the U.S. government, not just the CIA, but why the U.S. government went down this path. Looking back now with 17 years of experience, I'd say America has moved on beyond this. When I see public debates about should we do this again, I can't imagine either America or the CIA doing this again. Not because people are ashamed at the agency of what they did, but because America's moved on.
But if this is a tale that sort of allows the reader to be able to see how large organizations of any kind can move with speed and sometimes sort of fumble their way forward, doing the best that they can, but then making mistakes.
Yeah.
What is the lesson for leaders of large organizations, whether they be at the top of the CIA, FBI, Pentagon today, or any other private company, when they're faced with a crisis? What is your advice to them?
Keep calm. Do not let the workforce see you sweat. I'm not suggesting that happen, but you don't want people will act in a hurried manner. They'll get nervous if they see the leadership nervous. Keep calm. Get everybody around the table. I'm not saying 50, maybe 8 or 10. Ask good questions. Leadership asks great questions. They don't always have the right answers. And then periodically go back every 3 months, every 6 months and say, when we ask those initial questions in the heat of the moment, are we sure we asked them properly? And the second and final question, what are we doing wrong now as a result of those decisions that we need to correct?